Hey everyone, Reaper here again, this time with another one of my top 5 video game lists. This time I'm going to be doing the Sega Saturn. As I look at the stack that I have here now, I seem to have forgotten to put one down, so just give me a moment. Here we go. Now we're ready. I have to have my runner-up. All of these. For those of you that have been watching these videos, I know these videos don't get too many views because they're not really supposed to. These are just videos that I enjoy doing. I enjoy making video game videos, whether they're top 5 videos or they're videos that focus on a certain game or a certain game series or a certain company and so forth and so on. And I have a ton of these videos going to be coming out really soon over the next few weeks, few months, and so forth. So I'm really enjoying myself. But this is another one of my top 5 video lists. One of my favorite systems of all time. So let's get started. Top 5 in my collection, my favorite Sega Saturn games. We're starting at number 5. Panzer Dragoon Saga. This would have to be in anybody's, I think, top 5 Sega Saturn games. The game was terrific, but I think though sometimes Panzer Dragoon Saga is put on people's top lists because it's a very expensive game. It's a very expensive game today, but it's also a very good experience on the Sega Saturn. It's a role-playing game that took the Panzer Dragoon series and it changed it around. Went from an on-rail shooter to a role-playing game, and they did it, I think, quite excellently. Panzer Dragoon Saga at number 5. Number 4. This is a game that I was introduced. Has a funny story to it. I think I might even mentioned it in a video. At this point, I don't even remember what I'm saying in half of my other videos. But number 4 is Guardian Heroes, an excellent hand-drawn 2D sprite brawler type of final fight type game, if you will. Go throughout the stages, defeat multiple enemies. You could make certain decisions and go on different paths. This is a game that's available to play on the Xbox Live subscription service, I think. I would highly recommend, if you don't have a Sega Saturn or if you want to play this game, I would highly recommend getting it on Xbox Live. I was first introduced to this in the summer of 1996, hanging out with my friend Chris and his friend Joe, the guy that would like to bring over all the knives and all that stuff. I might have mentioned him in another video. He's the one that brought that game over and introduced it to us, and we both enjoyed it very much. More so than Joe's company. Number 3 on the list. I think this is one of the best turn-based strategy games on the Saturn. There weren't a whole lot of them, I'm sure there were a lot more in Japan than we got here in North America, but here we go. Shining Force 3. The third part of the very popular Shining series that began with Shining the Holy Ark. No, Shining in the Darkness, excuse me. Shining the Holy Ark came out for the Sega Saturn, which was another good game. But the Shining series began with Shining in the Darkness for the Sega Genesis. And this was a game that had 3 scenarios, so basically 3 different games. This is scenario 1. Unfortunately, once again, this was one of the last releases for the United States Sega Saturn. We didn't get the other 2 scenarios. Japan did, of course. So that's kind of a bummer because I think we really missed out. Some characters show up in this that later become main characters in Scenario 2 and Scenario 3. And it would have been nice to see, and it would have been nice to play as those characters as the whole game continues. But for what it's worth, what we got here, Scenario 1, which is a very good game. Also another one of those games that's kind of pricey. Number 2, one of my favorites. Absolute. It wouldn't be number 2 if it wasn't one of my favorites. Magic Knight Ray Earth. This was the last Sega Saturn game released in the United States in 1998. It was actually supposed to come out a few years earlier. There was talk about this game coming out ever since 1995, and it just never came out. It kept getting delayed, and it was made by Working Design. So hey, how could it be how can it be bad? It's not. It's a rather short game. It's It's like an action RPG game, somewhat sort of like a Zelda game, but I wouldn't compare this to Zelda because Zelda is, I think, quite superior to Magic Knight Ray Earth. But it has that feel, the top-down view. Great 2D drawn sprites. Excellent game. Funky voice acting, but that I think also lends to the charm of it. And my absolute favorite game for the Sega Saturn, then I'll go over the runner-up. Favorite game for the Sega Saturn is another game by Working Designs. It is a strategy role-playing game. Some of you may know of this, some of you may not. If you don't and you have access to a Sega Saturn, you could get this or you could afford to get this. I would recommend it wholeheartedly. Dragon Force. Fantastic game, hand-drawn 2D sprites. I love hand-drawn 2D sprites in games, especially even though this was at a time when games were going 3D, and a lot of people really didn't want to spend too much time playing 2D games because, hey, that was like the last generation. I think a lot of people missed out on Dragon Force. It's basically you lead your armies and you have to conquer all these different areas of the map, and you get your enemies to join you, and you have to refill your units. And you get to pick all these different unit types like soldier, cavalry, zombie, dragon. It gets really fun and it's a very interesting game. So I would recommend that game all day, every day. It's actually my favorite Sega Saturn game. Runner up to the list. Another Working Designs game, right? The Albert Odyssey. This is a traditional role-playing game, a turn-based role-playing game. It has a lot of funny dialogue. It's also, unfortunately, another one of these expensive games. Sega Saturn, a lot of those games are expensive. I'm going to do a couple of videos on expensive Sega Saturn games. Are they worth getting? Expensive PlayStation games, are they worth getting? And so forth. And I'll give you an idea at the time how much they go for and so forth. I personally... I think Albert Odyssey is a very, very good game. I don't think it's worth as much as it's going for. I think it's worth maybe about $60 less than what it's going for. But I think it's an excellent turn-based strategy game. It's a little slow, even by those days, their standards of turn-based strategy games. But it's an enjoyable game and definitely a big runner-up to my top 5 list. I hope you enjoyed my top 5 favorite Sega Saturn games. I will be going over my top 5 Sega CD games, my Nintendo 64 games, my Nintendo games over the next few weeks to conclude my top 5 series and move on to some other video game videos talking about different topics and so forth. Thank you for watching, everyone. Talk to you later. Take care.